Prince Edward Island in 1988 was known for its calm, close-knit communities, where everyone knew their neighbors and violent crime was almost unheard of. On November 12th, that peace was shattered when 36-year-old Byron Carr, a well-respected English teacher at Montague Regional High School, was found dead in his home at 24 Lapthorne Avenue in Charlottetown. To those around him, Carr was a kind, quiet man, devoted to his work and family. The discovery of his body shocked the entire island. Investigators soon learned that Carr had likely met the man who would kill him the night before, in the early hours of November 11th, somewhere in downtown Charlottetown. The crime scene revealed a violent struggle had taken place, and crucially, a message had been left on the wall reading, "I will kill again." This chilling note suggested the killer was not only brazen, but intended to continue a pattern of violence, striking fear throughout the province. In the late 1980s, with no modern DNA databases, the Charlottetown police faced an immense challenge in trying to identify a perpetrator who remained completely unknown, leaving the island with more questions than answers. The day Byron Carr was found, Charlottetown police quickly cordoned off his home, treating it as a high-priority homicide investigation. Officers and forensic experts combed through the house, documenting every detail and collecting physical evidence, including the knife and towel used in the attack. Witnesses were interviewed in the surrounding neighborhood, but very few had seen anything unusual on the night of November 11th. Investigators focused on Carr's last known movements, speaking with friends, colleagues, and anyone he had interacted with in the days leading up to his death. Police suspected that the killer was someone Carr had invited into his home, but without a name or description, leads were scarce. At the time, DNA technology existed, but was in its infancy, and there were no national databases to help match the evidence collected at the scene. The investigation was further complicated by the social climate of 1988, where members of the LGBTQ+ community often feared coming forward, leaving potential witnesses silent. Despite tireless efforts, the case quickly became one of Prince Edward Island's most perplexing mysteries, as the trail of evidence seemed to disappear into thin air. As the investigation into Byron Carr's murder stretched into the late 1980s and early 1990s, the case grew colder by the year. Charlottetown police maintained an open file, reviewing the evidence repeatedly, but the lack of witnesses and the absence of any solid leads left the investigation stagnant. DNA evidence collected from the scene, including skin cells under Carr's fingernails and traces on the towel, was preserved, but at the time it could not be effectively analyzed or matched to any suspect. Officers revisited the neighborhood multiple times, questioning residents about anyone unusual who may have been seen near Lapthorne Avenue, but memories faded and tips were sparse. The impact on the community was profound. Prince Edward Island had always been a place where neighbors watched out for one another, but Carr's murder introduced a chilling reality that danger could touch anyone. The LGBTQ+ community, already marginalized in 1988, experienced heightened fear. People who might have had information were reluctant to speak to police, worried about exposure or retaliation. The message left on the wall, above Carr's bed, stating, "I will kill again," became a haunting reminder of the killer's audacity and further intensified the island's anxiety. Over the next decade, investigators continued to follow any lead that emerged. Cold case units were consulted, and occasionally, tips came from outside the province, but they rarely produced actionable evidence. Police revisited Carr's personal connections, re-examining acquaintances, co-workers, and anyone who had been in contact with him in the weeks leading up to the murder. Despite these persistent efforts, the case remained unresolved, and for Carr's family, the uncertainty was unbearable. The preserved DNA evidence became a silent witness, quietly waiting for technology to advance. By the early 2000s, forensic science had progressed significantly, yet the isolated location of Prince Edward Island and the lack of national DNA comparisons still prevented a breakthrough. The case remained a painful reminder that even in small, seemingly safe communities, violent crime could leave long-lasting scars. The cold years reinforced the reality that solving Byron Carr's murder would require both patience and the eventual intervention of a scientific approach that did not yet exist. The fear and mystery surrounding the murder also had a psychological effect on the island's residents. Parents became more cautious. Students spoke in hushed tones about the tragedy at Montague Regional High School, and the wider community struggled to reconcile the brutality of the crime with the peaceful environment they had always known. For nearly 2 decades, the killer remained a ghost, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions and a community living in quiet apprehension. Even as time passed, Charlottetown police never closed the case. Evidence continued to be cataloged, and detectives occasionally revisited the investigation with fresh eyes, looking for patterns or missed connections. The hope that science might one day provide answers kept the case alive in both official records and in the minds of those who remembered Byron Carr as a kind and respected teacher. By the mid-2000s, new developments in DNA technology began to offer a glimmer of possibility, hinting that after decades of silence, the story of Byron Carr might finally have a resolution. After more than 3 decades, the investigation into Byron Carr's murder finally gained momentum thanks to advances in forensic science. In the spring of 2022, Charlottetown police partnered with a private company specializing in forensic genetic genealogy. This technique allowed investigators to take the DNA collected from the crime scene decades earlier and compare it with public genealogy databases, looking for distant relatives that could lead them to the killer. By carefully building family trees from these distant matches, police could narrow their search to individuals who fit the profile. The DNA evidence pointed them to one key person, Todd Joseph Gallant, who also used the surname Irving. In 1988, Gallant was 21 years old and living on Prince Edward Island. Records showed that he had a minor criminal record from the previous year and had moved away from the island shortly after Carr's murder. Over the years, he had lived in Texas and Arkansas before returning to PEI in 2022. The same year, police began their genealogical investigation. Investigators began to track his movements, confirming that he had been in Charlottetown at the time of the murder. With the genealogical work supporting the DNA evidence, police felt confident that they had identified the correct suspect. They also reviewed old police interviews and witness statements to verify that nothing contradicted the emerging picture of Gallant's involvement. In January of 2024, authorities finally acted. Todd Joseph Gallant was arrested in the town of Souris, Prince Edward Island, and charged with first-degree murder in connection to Byron Carr's death. A second individual was briefly detained during the investigation, but was later released as police focused entirely on Gallant. The arrest marked the end of a 35-year-long mystery, bringing the case out of the shadows and giving Carr's family and the island community long-awaited answers. The breakthrough was not only a victory for law enforcement, but also a demonstration of how modern science can solve crimes that were once considered unsolvable. DNA evidence, combined with meticulous genealogical work, had transformed a decades-old cold case into a live investigation. Police emphasized that while the arrest brought clarity, many questions remained, particularly regarding motive and the circumstances leading up to Carr's death. The community responded with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Many residents who had lived in fear for decades now had a name and a face to associate with the crime. The LGBTQ+ community, in particular, found some comfort in seeing justice pursued, even though the events of 1988 had left lasting scars. For Byron Carr's family, the arrest was a pivotal moment. Although they had lost loved ones over the years and endured decades without answers, seeing law enforcement finally identify the person responsible provided a sense of closure. Yet the emotional impact of the crime and the long wait for justice remained deeply felt. The breakthrough in the Carr case also served as a reminder of the evolving nature of criminal investigations. Techniques that were unavailable in the late 1980s had grown into powerful tools capable of revisiting old evidence and uncovering truths long hidden. For investigators, the success of the case reinforced the importance of preserving evidence and maintaining diligence, no matter how much time had passed. Following the arrest of Todd Joseph Gallant in January of 2024, the wheels of justice began to turn. Gallant was formally charged with first-degree murder and interfering with human remains in connection to the death of Byron Carr. In October of 2024, he entered a plea of not guilty in Supreme Court, setting the stage for a trial that would test both the forensic evidence and the painstaking genealogical work that had identified him. The case drew national attention as Canadians followed the developments in what had been one of the country's most infamous cold cases. As of late 2025, the case remains in pretrial proceedings, with court dates scheduled for various motions. Gallant's defense team has challenged aspects of the DNA evidence, questioning the legality of its collection and the methods used in the genealogical analysis. Meanwhile, Charlottetown police have maintained that the combination of preserved DNA and careful genealogical investigation is reliable and conclusive. They emphasize that the evidence links Gallant directly to Carr's murder, even decades after the crime. For Byron Carr's family, the arrest represents both relief and a bittersweet end to a long chapter of uncertainty. While they never got to see the immediate consequences of the crime in the years following his death, finally knowing the identity of the perpetrator has provided a measure of closure. The decades of fear, unanswered questions, and the emotional toll of living with an unsolved murder have finally been acknowledged through the legal process. The case also raises broader questions about motive. Was Carr's murder the result of a robbery gone wrong, or was it influenced by prejudice against the LGBTQ+ community in 1988? Charlottetown Police Chief Brad McConnell has stated that understanding the full context and motive remains a priority for law enforcement, emphasizing the importance of uncovering the social and personal factors that led to this tragic act. The arrest and ongoing legal proceedings have renewed public interest in cold cases across Canada. Investigators hope that the success of the Carr case, solved through modern forensic and genealogical methods, will inspire renewed attention to other unsolved crimes. It demonstrates that no matter how much time has passed, justice can eventually be pursued, and evidence can speak even decades later. Community members have reflected on the lasting impact of the crime. For Prince Edward Island, a province often seen as peaceful and safe, the murder of Byron Carr remains a stark reminder of vulnerability, fear, and the importance of vigilance. Yet the case also illustrates the resilience of a community committed to seeking justice, no matter how long it takes. The story of Byron Carr is one of tragedy, perseverance, and the slow march of justice. While the scars of the past cannot be erased, the combination of determined investigators, advanced science, and community support has finally provided answers that were once thought impossible. It is a testament to the enduring power of persistence in law enforcement and the relentless pursuit of truth. Even as the legal process continues, the legacy of Byron Carr and the resolution of his case offer hope that no crime, however cold or forgotten, is ever truly beyond the reach of justice. The haunting questions of 1988 are slowly being answered, closing a chapter of fear and uncertainty for the people of Prince Edward Island. In the early hours of October 2nd, 2003, a quiet apartment building on Mountain Avenue in Winnipeg, Manitoba, became the scene of one of the city's most haunting unsolved murders. Inside a modest third-floor suite, 3 young children were asleep, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. Their mother, 32-year-old Nicolle Hands, was awake only a room away, facing an unimaginable terror that would end her life. At around 3:30 in the morning, neighbors later recalled hearing noises, a struggle, a woman's voice, and then silence. Within minutes, a babysitter inside the home, along with Nicolle's eldest child, discovered that something terrible had happened. When police and paramedics arrived, they found a chaotic and devastating scene. Nicolle had been violently attacked and left critically injured. The children, frightened and confused, were quickly taken from the apartment as emergency crews worked to save her life. She was rushed to the hospital in grave condition, and detectives from the Winnipeg Police Service Homicide Unit were immediately called to the scene. There were no signs of forced entry, which led investigators to believe that Nicolle had willingly allowed her attacker inside. The building's hallways were quiet, and no one had seen a stranger enter or leave at that hour. Word of the attack reached Nicolle's family hundreds of miles away in Kingston, Ontario. Her mother, Eleanor, received a call from a doctor at the hospital, explaining that her daughter had been found unresponsive after a violent assault. Eleanor pleaded with him to keep Nicolle alive until she could arrive. She traveled to Winnipeg as quickly as possible, bringing Nicolle's two oldest children with her. The hospital room was filled with heartbreak, a mother's desperate hope, and two young children who could barely comprehend what had happened to their mom. Nicolle survived for 3 days, but her injuries were too severe. On October 5th, 2003, she passed away in the hospital, surrounded by family. Her death officially transformed the investigation from an assault into a homicide. Police began canvassing the area, collecting statements, and searching for anyone who might have seen or heard something that night. But as the hours turned into days, no suspect was identified, and no one had a clear explanation of what led to the attack. That early morning on Mountain Avenue marked the beginning of a case that would confound detectives for decades. A young mother was gone, 3 children were left without their parent, and a community was left to wonder who could have committed such an act. The answers would prove to be elusive, and the mystery of what happened to Nicolle Hands would haunt Winnipeg for years to come. Before her name became tied to one of Manitoba's most mysterious unsolved murders, Nicolle Catherine Hands was known simply as a devoted mother and a loving friend. Born in Kingston, Ontario, in 1971, she was remembered as kind, warm, and determined. Friends said Nicolle had a quiet strength, the sort of resilience that showed through in her ability to handle life's challenges without complaint. After moving to Winnipeg, she built a new life for herself and her 3 young children, determined to provide stability and safety in a city that, while not without its dangers, offered her a fresh start. Nicolle lived in a small 3rd-floor apartment at 271 Mountain Avenue, a modest building in Winnipeg's North End. The area was working class, with narrow streets, older homes, and an eclectic mix of families and tenants. Neighbors often saw Nicolle walking her children to nearby schools or chatting with residents in the stairwell. She had recently started working part-time, balancing her schedule between her job, raising her kids, and trying to maintain some sense of normalcy. To most who knew her, she was quiet but friendly, a woman who stayed focused on her children and avoided trouble. However, in the months leading up to October of 2003, Nicolle confided in a few close friends that she had been receiving unwanted attention. Some reports later suggested that she knew her attacker, though police never publicly confirmed this detail. Those close to her recalled that she sometimes seemed uneasy at night and occasionally mentioned feeling as though she was being watched. Despite this, she tried not to show fear in front of her children. Her priority was always them, making sure they felt safe and loved inside their small apartment. Investigators later learned that the days before the attack had been relatively routine for Nicolle. She'd gone grocery shopping, taken her children to a local park, and made phone calls to family back in Ontario. Everything about her life appeared stable. On the evening before the assault, she reportedly spoke with her mother, Eleanor, over the phone. They discussed normal things, the kids, work, and plans for the upcoming holidays. Nothing in that conversation suggested that Nicolle sensed any danger. It would be the last time Eleanor ever heard her daughter's voice. When detectives began piecing together her final hours, they faced an unsettling realization. There were no signs of a break-in, and nothing of value had been stolen. Whoever had entered Nicolle's apartment had likely been someone she trusted enough to let inside. Police began conducting interviews with neighbors, friends, and former acquaintances, hoping to trace Nicolle's recent interactions. Some neighbors said they heard muffled voices late at night, while others mentioned seeing an unfamiliar man in the hallway days earlier, a detail investigators could never fully verify. In the early stages of the investigation, police considered several possibilities. Was this a targeted attack motivated by personal conflict or a random act of violence? The absence of forced entry and theft suggested intent beyond robbery. Forensic investigators processed the apartment carefully, gathering fibers, fingerprints, and biological evidence using techniques available at the time. But early DNA analysis in the early 2000s was still developing, and the samples collected did not lead to an immediate match in any known database. By the end of October 2003, detectives had interviewed more than 30 individuals and reviewed countless tips, yet no suspect had been charged. Every detail of Nicolle's final days, from her grocery runs to her final phone call, was dissected in hopes of finding the missing link. For her family, the lack of progress was agonizing. They knew Nicolle's life had been simple and centered on her children, which made her murder all the more inexplicable. As weeks turned into months, the unanswered questions grew heavier. Who had Nicolle let into her home that night? And what had happened in those quiet hours before the attack? And why, after so much investigation, did no one seem to have seen or heard the person responsible? For Winnipeg police, the case was far from over. But already, the haunting silence surrounding Nicolle's murder had begun to set in. On the morning of October 4th, 2003, the quiet of Winnipeg's North End was broken by a chilling discovery inside a modest apartment building at 271 Mountain Avenue. Nicolle Hands' lifeless body was found in her third-floor suite by a concerned relative who had stopped by after being unable to reach her for several days. The scene that awaited first responders was deeply unsettling. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that Nicolle either knew her killer or had willingly allowed them inside. Nothing valuable was missing, ruling out robbery as a motive. For investigators, it was clear from the start, this was a personal, deliberate act. Paramedics arrived quickly, but could do nothing to help. Winnipeg Police Service officers sealed off the entire floor, turning the small apartment into an active crime scene. Neighbors were questioned immediately. Many recalled hearing nothing unusual, no screams, no arguments, just the typical creaks and muffled noises of the aging building. A few remembered seeing Nicolle's children being taken away safely to stay with family members, while others said police moved in and out of the suite for hours, carefully collecting evidence. Within hours, the investigation had officially begun, one that would span years without resolution. Forensic teams worked methodically through the apartment. They documented every item, photographed every angle, and searched for fingerprints and DNA evidence using techniques available in the early 2000s. Blood pattern analysis and fiber collection were carried out in detail. Investigators collected clothing, personal items, and a series of small samples that could later be tested for DNA. At that time, however, DNA databases in Canada were still in their infancy, and technology lacked the precision it would gain a decade later. The samples were preserved, but results were limited. Still, detectives believed the key to solving Nicolle's case could one day be found within that evidence. Police spokespeople assured the public that the homicide was being treated with the highest priority. Detectives canvassed nearby apartments and the surrounding neighborhood for witnesses, hoping that someone had seen an unfamiliar person entering or leaving the building around the time of Nicolle's death. A few neighbors mentioned a man seen in the hallway in the days before the discovery, described only as tall, wearing dark clothing and possibly carrying a duffel bag. Unfortunately, This vague description was not enough to build a clear suspect profile. No one had seen the man enter or leave Nicolle's specific apartment on the night of the crime. The media began to cover the story widely across Manitoba. Headlines described the tragedy as both horrifying and deeply mysterious. Reporters noted how little police were saying publicly, and rumors quickly began to circulate. Some speculated about domestic issues or possible connections to acquaintances Nicolle had mentioned feeling uncomfortable around. Others theorized it might have been a random attack, though that seemed unlikely given the absence of forced entry. The case stirred unease throughout Winnipeg, particularly among residents in the North End who worried about an unknown killer still at large. Detectives soon brought in specialists from other divisions of the Winnipeg Police Service to assist. Criminal profilers were consulted, hoping to develop behavioral insights into the possible suspect. The lack of theft and the manner in which the apartment had been left suggested someone acting out of emotion, possibly anger, resentment, or obsession. This indicated the killer may have had a personal connection to Nicolle. Yet without hard evidence, police were left to rely on instinct and deduction. Dozens of interviews were conducted, and multiple people of interest were identified, but none could be conclusively linked to the crime. Meanwhile, forensic analysts continued processing the evidence. Technicians compared hair fibers, analyzed trace material, and examined possible fingerprints lifted from surfaces inside the apartment. Some prints belonged to Nicolle and her children, while others could not be matched to anyone in existing police databases. The uncertainty added frustration for investigators, who believed they were close to a breakthrough, but could not yet tie any single individual to the scene beyond doubt. By the end of 2003, the case had hit its first major stall. Despite extensive forensic work, neighborhood canvassing, and hundreds of investigative hours, no suspect had been charged. Police confirmed to local media that the case remained open and active, but behind the scenes, leads were drying up. The tragedy of Nicolle Hands' death had left a void in her family and a mystery in the city of Winnipeg, one that only deepened as winter set in and the case grew colder with each passing week. As the years passed, Nicolle Hands' murder remained unsolved, becoming one of Winnipeg's most haunting cold cases. The file, meticulously compiled by the Winnipeg Police Service, sat largely inactive for nearly a decade. Investigators had pursued every lead possible at the time, but the combination of limited forensic technology and uncooperative witnesses stalled progress. Many in the community feared that the killer might never be identified, and Nicolle's family struggled with the ongoing uncertainty. Her mother, Eleanor, kept a careful record of every development, saving clippings, police updates, and personal notes. A private archive of grief and determination. In 2012, a renewed effort came with the formation of Project Devote, a joint task force of the Winnipeg Police Service and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. This initiative focused specifically on cold cases involving missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. For Nicolle's case, Project Devote brought new resources, fresh investigators, and modern forensic techniques that had advanced significantly since 2003. Detectives re-interviewed former witnesses, visited the crime scene, and reviewed every piece of evidence with modern standards in mind. Even decades-old DNA samples were re-examined using more sophisticated testing methods. Investigators worked carefully to reconstruct Nicolle's social life in the months leading up to her death. They looked into her friendships, past relationships, and any known conflicts that could indicate a motive. Attention was paid to her involvement in Winnipeg's North End community, her connections through work, and interactions with people she trusted. Police also focused on her financial dealings, attempts to resolve personal disputes, and any indications of threats she might have received. Each detail was examined to build a clearer picture of her final days. Witness cooperation remained a challenge. Many people who had known Nicolle or been around her social circle in 2003 were reluctant to speak. Fear of reprisal, ongoing involvement in illicit activities, or mistrust of authorities created significant barriers. To overcome this, Project Devote investigators worked closely with community organizations to encourage safe reporting and provide assurance that any information would be confidential. They also reviewed statements collected during the original investigation, seeking inconsistencies or overlooked clues that might now be relevant. In addition to witness interviews, the task force employed behavioral analysis techniques to narrow potential suspects. Profilers assessed the likelihood that Nicolle's killer had a personal connection, given the lack of forced entry and the nature of the attack. They compared her case with other unresolved homicides in Manitoba, looking for patterns that could indicate a serial offender or someone with a history of violence. Investigators also traced people of interest who had been close to Nicolle around the time of her death, verifying alibis and searching for any inconsistencies. Technological advancements played a significant role in reopening the case. Crime scene photos were enhanced, fingerprints reanalyzed, and trace evidence retested using modern equipment. Digital mapping of the neighborhood and cell phone records were used to identify individuals in proximity to Nicolle's apartment on October 2nd, 2003. Investigators hoped that these modern tools could reveal something missed in the original probe. By 2014, Project Devote had conducted in-person interviews with Nicolle's surviving children, now young adults, and her mother Eleanor, traveling to Kingston to gather first-hand accounts. Their recollections, combined with the re-examined forensic evidence, provided new insights. Though no immediate arrest was made, investigators believed they had narrowed the suspect pool and were closer than ever to uncovering the truth. Despite these efforts, the case remained unsolved, highlighting the challenges inherent in cold cases involving intimate knowledge, fear, and limited evidence. Project Devote's work, however, ensured that Nicolle's story was never forgotten. The dedication of investigators and the persistence of her family kept the case active and visible, preserving hope that one day the person responsible for Nicolle Hands' death would be identified and held accountable. After years of painstaking investigation, Project Devote made a significant development in March of 2020. Investigators arrested a Winnipeg man in connection with Nicolle Hands' murder. This moment brought a surge of hope to her family, especially her mother Eleanor, who had been waiting for answers for nearly 17 years. For Nicolle's 3 children, now adults, the news felt like a long-awaited opportunity to finally confront the past. The arrest indicated that persistent investigative work, combined with modern forensic methods and community engagement, could bring new leads even decades after a crime. Despite the excitement surrounding the arrest, the relief was short-lived. Within 24 hours, the suspect was released due to insufficient evidence to formally charge him with Nicolle's murder. Investigators and Crown prosecutors concluded that, although the man fit aspects of the description and had potential connections to Nicolle's life, the case lacked the concrete proof required for a conviction. The sudden reversal was devastating for Nicolle's family, reopening old wounds and emphasizing the difficulties of achieving justice in cold cases. Eleanor described the moment as heartbreaking, particularly when she had to inform her grandchildren that the man they thought responsible was now free. The case highlighted several challenges inherent in investigating crimes like Nicolle's. The lack of forced entry suggested she knew her attacker, but the fear and silence within the community made it difficult to gather first-hand accounts. Witnesses often hesitated to come forward due to fear of retaliation or distrust of law enforcement. Investigators also faced limitations imposed by the passage of time. Memories faded, evidence degraded, and potential suspects or witnesses moved away or passed on. These factors collectively made it difficult to create a fully substantiated case, even with the advantage of modern forensic techniques. Before the arrest, the Winnipeg Police Service had announced a restructuring, removing officers from the Project Devote task force to form an internal cold case unit. While collaboration between the RCMP and the local police continued, The change created uncertainties and slowed some investigative processes. The team worked under the understanding that every lead might be critical, but organizational changes inevitably affected the pace and strategy of the investigation. Despite these obstacles, authorities maintained a commitment to keeping Nicolle's case active, demonstrating the enduring importance of her story within the broader context of unsolved crimes against Indigenous women in Canada. Tragically, in late 2023, the primary suspect passed away. With his death, the possibility of achieving justice through a traditional conviction disappeared. For Eleanor and Nicolle's children, this loss underscored the limits of the legal system in cases where time, fear, and evidence constraints intersect. While the police consider the case technically still open, the reality is that the chance of a courtroom resolution is gone. However, investigators continue to hope that someone with information might step forward, even decades later, to help provide answers and closure to Nicolle's family. The unresolved nature of Nicolle's murder has kept public attention focused on the broader crisis of violence against Indigenous women in Canada. Her story is cited frequently in discussions about systemic challenges, the need for improved reporting, and community support. It serves as a stark reminder of the importance of dedicated investigative resources and the persistence required to tackle cold cases. Advocates argue that unresolved murders like Nicolle's emphasize the need for ongoing reforms in law enforcement and justice systems to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Nicolle's family continues to hold out hope for closure. Eleanor has made direct appeals to anyone with information, urging them to contact authorities and help bring some peace to a family that has waited far too long. Community leaders and Indigenous advocacy groups echo this plea, encouraging anyone with knowledge to come forward. While the path to justice may never be complete, the story of Nicolle Hands remains a powerful call for awareness, accountability, and the relentless pursuit of answers. Through all of the setbacks, Nicolle's memory endures as a reminder of a young mother taken too soon. Her life, her struggles, and her enduring love for her children continue to resonate. The case may be unsolved, but the dedication of her family, the investigators, and the community ensures that she is not forgotten. In the end, the story of Nicolle Hands is not just about a crime. It is about persistence, remembrance, and the hope that someday truth will prevail. Though the primary suspect in Nicolle Hands' murder has passed away, the case remains officially open with the Winnipeg Police Service. Investigators continue to monitor any potential leads, no matter how small, understanding that even decades later, new information can emerge. The ongoing attention highlights the importance of cold case units and the dedicated officers who tirelessly review files, interview witnesses, and analyze old evidence with modern technology. Each effort, whether reviewing surveillance footage, forensic materials, or witness statements, is aimed at answering the most pressing question: who killed Nicolle Hands and why? For Nicolle's family, the years of uncertainty have been a profound struggle. Her mother, Eleanor, has spoken openly about the emotional toll, describing the mix of hope and despair that has defined life since October of 2003. She has become an advocate for families of missing and murdered Indigenous women, emphasizing the critical need for systemic reform in how these cases are investigated. Eleanor's dedication to keeping Nicolle's story alive has inspired many in Manitoba and beyond to support victims' families and to encourage anyone with knowledge of such crimes to come forward. The tragedy of Nicolle Hands also sheds light on broader societal challenges. Cases involving Indigenous women often face additional barriers, including systemic bias, fear of retaliation, and community mistrust of law enforcement. These obstacles complicate investigations, delaying justice and leaving families in prolonged states of grief. Nicolle's story exemplifies the intersection of personal tragedy and social inequities, serving as a case study in the urgent need for increased awareness, resources, and community engagement. Her murder is a reminder that true crime is not just about sensational stories. It is about real people, families, and communities impacted by violence. In Winnipeg, Nicolle's 3 children continue to navigate life carrying the memory of their mother. As young adults, they have shared their experiences with investigators, journalists, and advocacy groups, hoping that their voices might help uncover answers. The children's willingness to speak openly about the case has provided investigators with perspectives that were unavailable at the time of the murder. It also ensures that Nicolle's story is remembered as more than a headline. It is a personal and ongoing narrative of love, loss, and the pursuit of truth. While no one will ever know the full details of Nicolle's final moments, her legacy endures in the lives of her children and the work of those dedicated to solving cold cases. Community outreach programs and Indigenous advocacy organizations continue to honor her memory, highlighting the urgent need to protect vulnerable populations and prevent future tragedies. Each anniversary of her death serves as a call to action, reminding authorities and the public alike that unresolved cases require vigilance and care. The story of Nicolle Hands has become emblematic of the broader movement to address violence against Indigenous women in Canada. For those following the investigation, the hope remains that someone, somewhere, may hold crucial information. Even decades after the crime, new technology, witness recollections, or previously overlooked evidence could provide breakthroughs. The police encourage the public to contact them if they know anything, reinforcing that it is never too late to come forward. Every piece of information, no matter how small, could contribute to finally bringing closure to Nicolle's family and holding the responsible party accountable. In reflecting on this case, it becomes clear that Nicolle Hands' story is about more than a crime. It is about resilience, memory, and the ongoing struggle for justice. While the legal system may never fully deliver the answers her family sought, their advocacy and determination ensure that Nicolle will not be forgotten. Her life and the mystery surrounding her death continue to inspire action, awareness, and a commitment to justice for others who have suffered similar fates. In the end, the case stands as a poignant reminder of the importance of remembering victims, supporting families, and relentlessly pursuing the truth. Though the investigation may face limits imposed by time and circumstance, the impact of Nicolle Hands' life and the efforts to uncover her story persist. Her memory motivates investigators, communities, and families to never give up hope. It is a story that speaks to the power of perseverance, the necessity of vigilance, and the enduring demand for justice in the face of tragedy. Nicolle Hands remains at the center of Manitoba's unsolved mysteries, a symbol of both loss and the relentless pursuit of answers that define the human quest for closure. On a warm summer night in late August of 1999, Jason MacCullough left a gathering at a friend's house in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. It was a humid evening, and the air was thick with the sounds of the neighborhood. Jason had spent time with friends on Joseph Young Street, but as the night grew later, he decided to head home. He lived with his parents just a short distance away on Russell Street. The fastest way to get there was by cutting through Highfield Park, a well-worn pathway that connected Joseph Young Street to Pinecrest Drive. It was a common route, one that Jason had walked before. The area was surrounded by duplexes, apartment buildings, and basketball courts, and many local residents used the path regularly. But this night would be different. At approximately 1:30 in the morning, on August 28, Jason MacCullough was shot at near point-blank range while walking along the pathway. Residents in nearby homes heard the gunfire, followed by the sound of footsteps quickly scattering into the night. Concerned, someone called the police. An hour later, at 2:30 in the morning, officers arrived at the scene and discovered Jason's body on the path between 2 apartment buildings at 100 and 104 Pinecrest Drive. He was less than 6 blocks from home. Jason was only 19 years old. By all accounts, he was a kind, quiet young man who had never been involved in any criminal activity. He had no known enemies, no history of violence, and no apparent reason to be targeted. His murder appeared to be entirely senseless. Investigators arrived at the scene and began searching for evidence, but there was little to go on. Jason had not been robbed, and nothing of value had been taken. There were no immediate suspects and no clear motive. The crime had occurred in a residential area where people lived, worked, and went about their daily lives. It seemed likely that someone had seen or heard something. Yet, as the hours passed and the investigation began, one thing became clear. Jason MacCullough's murder would not be an easy case to solve. When police arrived at the scene in the early morning hours of August 28, 1999, they immediately began securing the area and collecting any potential evidence. The pathway where Jason MacCullough was found was surrounded by multi-unit housing, meaning there were numerous people living nearby. Officers went door to door, hoping to find witnesses who had seen or heard something unusual that night. Some residents reported hearing a gunshot, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps moving away from the area. However, no one had seen the shooting take place, and there were no immediate descriptions of a suspect. With no security cameras in the area at the time, police were left without crucial visual evidence. Investigators processed the crime scene carefully. The fact that Jason had not been robbed suggested that the motive was not theft. There were no immediate signs of a struggle, leading police to believe that the attack had been swift and unexpected. The location of the shooting also raised questions. While Highfield Park was a known shortcut, it was also a relatively open space, surrounded by residential buildings. The fact that someone had fired a gun in such a public area meant the killer had either acted impulsively or felt confident that they would not be caught. Over the next several days, police expanded their investigation. They reviewed Jason's background, speaking with his family, friends, and co-workers. Everyone who knew him described him as a responsible and kind young man, with no involvement in criminal activity. He was known for volunteering with local organizations and helping neighbors with everyday tasks. There was nothing in his past that suggested he had been in danger. Despite the efforts of law enforcement, there were no clear leads in the case. Without a motive or a suspect, the investigation faced immediate challenges. Police appealed to the public for information, hoping that someone who had been in the area that night would come forward. However, in the days following the murder, no new witnesses emerged. As time passed, frustration grew within both the police department and the community. Jason's family was left searching for answers, while investigators struggled with the reality that the case was already becoming difficult to solve. With no immediate leads, police turned to forensic analysis in hopes of uncovering evidence that could point them toward Jason MacCullough's killer. Officers examined the crime scene carefully, searching for anything that might have been left behind by the perpetrator. They looked for footprints, fingerprints, or any objects that could be connected to the crime. However, the results of their search were disappointing. There were no obvious signs pointing to a suspect. Detectives also considered the possibility that Jason had been followed that night. They retraced his steps from the party on Joseph Young Street to the pathway where he was killed, trying to determine if anyone could have been watching him. The distance was just over 1 kilometer, a walk Jason had taken before without any issues. Given that the shooting occurred close to apartment buildings, police believed someone in the area may have seen something suspicious. Investigators broadened their efforts by speaking with individuals who had been near Highfield Park that night. They wanted to know if anyone had noticed a person acting strangely before or after the shooting. While some residents recalled hearing footsteps, there were no clear descriptions of a suspect. With limited evidence, police considered whether Jason's murder could have been a case of mistaken identity. This theory was difficult to prove, but investigators could not ignore the fact that he had no known enemies or criminal connections. If Jason had not been the intended target, it was possible that the person responsible had mistaken him for someone else. As weeks passed, the case remained at a standstill. Law enforcement continued to urge the public to come forward with any information, emphasizing that even the smallest detail could be significant. Despite these efforts, no one provided the key piece of evidence needed to move the investigation forward. Months after Jason MacCullough's murder, the investigation remained active, but progress was slow. Detectives reviewed every lead they had gathered, hoping to find a missing connection. The lack of physical evidence made the case difficult, and without witnesses willing to come forward, police were left with few options. In an effort to generate new leads, law enforcement released composite sketches of 5 men seen in the area around the time of the shooting. These individuals were considered persons of interest, though police never identified them as suspects. Investigators hoped that someone in the community would recognize them and provide useful information. Despite these efforts, none of the men in the sketches were officially linked to the crime. A year after the murder, an unexpected development put Jason's case back in the public eye. Authorities arrested a group of men for an unrelated home invasion that had occurred just hours before Jason was killed. This crime took place only a few hundred meters from the pathway where his body was found. During the home invasion, one of the men brandished a firearm, adding to speculation that Jason's murder could have been connected. However, while the individuals involved in the break-in were charged for that crime, none were ever formally accused in Jason's case. Over time, the investigation faced new challenges. Witnesses who may have had crucial information were either unwilling or afraid to speak. Some members of the community believed that people with knowledge of the crime were staying silent out of fear of retaliation. This silence made it nearly impossible for police to confirm theories or rule out suspects. Years later, Jason's case was added to the Rewards for Major Unsolved Crimes program, offering a financial reward for information leading to an arrest. Despite this incentive, no one provided the evidence needed to solve the case. Police have continued to urge anyone with knowledge of what happened that night to come forward, emphasizing that even after decades, it is never too late for justice. As the years passed, Jason MacCullough's murder remained one of Nova Scotia's most haunting cold cases. Despite continued appeals from police and Jason's family, no one had come forward with the crucial information needed to solve the case. Investigators continued to believe that multiple witnesses were present at the time of the shooting, but the silence surrounding the crime remained unbroken. In April of the year 2005, law enforcement announced they were searching for a woman believed to have been in Highfield Park on the night of Jason's murder. They did not disclose what connection she might have had to the case, but it was clear that investigators hoped she could provide new insight. However, there was no public confirmation that she was ever identified or located. In the year 2014, former Detective Tom Martin, who had worked on Jason's case from the very beginning, stated that investigators had come very, very close to laying charges that year. However, without a witness willing to testify or provide direct evidence, the case could not move forward. The challenge of solving Jason's murder mirrored the struggles seen in other unsolved cases, where key individuals remained silent despite knowing what had happened. By the 20th anniversary of Jason's murder in the year 2019, Halifax Regional Police released another public statement urging anyone with information to come forward. They emphasized that even small details could help break the case, and they hoped that the passage of time would encourage witnesses to speak. The case remained open, and police assured the public that they were still committed to finding answers. Jason MacCullough's family never stopped seeking justice. His parents, Carolyn and Alan MacCullough, continued to speak out, reminding the community that their son's life was stolen in an act of senseless violence. They urged anyone with information to imagine how they would feel if they had lost a loved one in such a way. The murder of Jason MacCullough remains a painful mystery. His name is still listed in the Rewards for Major Unsolved Crimes program, and law enforcement maintains that solving the case is possible if the right person comes forward. Until then, his family, friends, and community continue to wait for the justice that has eluded them for so long. In January of 1992, 18-year-old Andrea King left her home in British Columbia, full of excitement and hope for her first solo adventure across Canada. She'd been saving money for months, planning to travel coast to coast, experience new places, and meet new people along the way. Her first stop was Halifax, Nova Scotia, a city she had never visited before. Andrea had arranged to stay at a local youth hostel and was eager to explore the city's waterfront, historic streets, and vibrant culture. On New Year's Day, she boarded her flight, calling her family to let them know she had arrived safely. That phone call was brief and ordinary, but it would become the last time her family would hear her voice. Upon landing at Halifax International Airport, she made her way to the hostel, excited to settle in and begin this chapter of her journey. Everything about her trip seemed routine and hopeful, but in the quiet of the city, a series of events was about to unfold that would shatter her family's world and leave Halifax haunted by questions that remain unanswered to this day. After arriving in Halifax on January 1st, 1992, Andrea King's family expected to hear from her again within a few days. She was an organized and responsible young woman, careful to check in with loved ones while traveling. But the calls never came, days turned into a week, and the silence grew heavier with each passing day. Andrea's mother, Anne King, grew increasingly anxious. She tried calling the hostel where Andrea was supposed to be staying, but staff there told her that Andrea had never checked in. Concern turned quickly into fear as it became clear that something was very wrong. By January 4th, Anne King decided to take formal action. She reported Andrea as a missing person to the Halifax Regional Police. At first, the response from authorities was discouraging. They treated Andrea's disappearance as a case of a young adult taking an unannounced trip rather than a potential crime. This initial dismissal frustrated the family, as they knew Andrea's habits and character, understanding that she would never leave without telling anyone. Every day, without news, was an agonizing reminder of the uncertainty surrounding her fate. In the weeks following the report, the investigation began in earnest, but progress was slow. Police reached out to local airports, hostels, and transportation services, searching for records of Andrea's movements, yet found nothing beyond her initial arrival. Flyers were posted throughout the city, and local media covered the story, hoping someone might have seen her. Friends and fellow travelers were interviewed, but no new leads emerged. Andrea's absence from the hostel, combined with her lack of contact with family, created a trail that ended abruptly, leaving investigators with only questions and theories. The silence surrounding Andrea's whereabouts persisted for nearly a full year. Her family refused to give up hope, constantly pushing the police for updates and scouring the city for any trace of their daughter. Anne King even traveled to Halifax herself, distributing posters and speaking with local businesses and residents, desperate for someone to remember something small. A conversation, a sighting, a detail that might provide a clue. The sense of dread grew heavier with each passing month, and the realization that Andrea's disappearance was not a simple case of a young woman traveling alone became increasingly apparent. By December of 1992, the family and investigators had exhausted every conventional lead. The lack of information left the case in a limbo of uncertainty, with frustration mounting on all sides. Halifax, a city full of life and movement, seemed to conceal the truth behind a veil of normalcy, holding the mystery of Andrea King's fate just out of reach. It was a year marked by unanswered questions, and little did anyone know that the shocking discovery of her remains was just around the corner, ready to turn this missing person investigation into a chilling cold case. Nearly a year after Andrea King disappeared, on December 22nd, 1992, a man walking his dog in a wooded area near the Sackville Business Park in Halifax stumbled upon a disturbing scene. The location, on the outskirts of the city, yet close to bustling suburban developments, immediately caught the attention of police. Halifax Regional Police were called to the scene, and investigators quickly confirmed the worst. The remains were those of 18-year-old Andrea King. The discovery transformed the case from a missing person investigation into a homicide, raising urgent questions about how such a young woman could vanish and end up in that location without anyone noticing. The site itself was a mix of dense woods and lightly trodden paths, making it an odd place for a person to be found by accident. Police cordoned off the area and began a meticulous search for evidence, documenting the surroundings for any clues that might indicate how Andrea had been brought there. Although the body had been exposed to the elements for nearly a year, investigators still hoped that even the smallest trace, footprints, discarded items, or personal belongings, might provide a lead. Every detail mattered, as time had eroded much of the physical evidence. The discovery immediately drew media attention, and Andrea's family was notified, shattering them once again with grief and disbelief. Ann King described the moment as the realization of their worst fears, finally confirming that their daughter had not simply disappeared, but had been taken from them. The police now faced the challenge of piecing together the events of nearly 12 months prior, trying to identify potential witnesses and reconstruct Andrea's final hours in Halifax. Investigators began retracing her steps, revisiting hostels, transport hubs, and areas where Andrea was known to have spent time. They conducted interviews with locals, workers, and anyone who might have seen her during her brief stay in the city. Witness statements were sparse, and few provided consistent or actionable information. The case highlighted the difficulties of investigating a crime long after it occurred, as memories fade and evidence degrades. At the same time, forensic examinations were underway. Although DNA technology was still developing, police collected every possible sample for future testing. Clothing, personal items, and remnants found near the scene were preserved with care, in hopes that advances in technology could eventually provide answers. The realization that Andrea's disappearance had ended in murder intensified the urgency. Yet, it also underscored the challenges investigators faced with limited leads and nearly a year of lost time. As the investigation continued, it became clear that someone had intentionally brought Andrea to that secluded area. This fact shifted the focus of the investigation to individuals with potential knowledge of her movements and those with a history of predatory behavior. Halifax Regional Police maintained a perimeter of interest, interviewing known offenders and cross-referencing information from other unsolved cases. The discovery was both a breakthrough and a heartbreak. It confirmed Andrea's fate, but left an even deeper mystery. Who was responsible, and why had the crime gone unnoticed for so long? The case became a chilling reminder that even in a modern city, a young person could vanish, and crucial evidence could easily slip through the cracks. From this point onward, the investigation would focus on building connections between Andrea, her final known locations, and any individuals who might have interacted with her. The police recognized that solving this case would require patience, persistence, and an openness to new forensic methods as they developed in the coming decades. Every day brought the hope that a lead, no matter how small, could finally bring Andrea King's killer to justice. As the investigation into Andrea King's death progressed, Halifax Regional Police focused on individuals with known histories of violent or predatory behavior. One name that repeatedly surfaced was Andrew Paul Johnson, a former Halifax resident with a documented record as a sex offender. Johnson had been previously implicated in other unsolved cases, including the 1989 disappearance of Kimberly McAndrew, a young woman whose case bore some similarities to Andrea's. While police had no direct evidence linking him to Andrea at first, his criminal history made him a person of interest. By the late 1990s, investigators began to piece together more circumstantial connections. While serving time in a British Columbia prison, Johnson participated in a sex offender treatment program, which included writing exercises. One essay he produced described a fictional abduction and murder of a young woman, and the details alarmingly matched theories police had about Andrea King's disappearance and death. Though it was not a confession, it provided investigators with a disturbing insight into his mindset and possible methods. In addition to the essay, investigators discovered a compact mirror belonging to Andrea in a location associated with Johnson. The mirror became a key piece of physical evidence, suggesting he had been in possession of her personal property. Police hoped that combining this evidence with witness statements and behavioral patterns could build a strong case. For the King family, the discovery offered a glimmer of hope that someone was finally within reach of being held accountable. Despite these developments, the case remained complex. Much of the evidence was circumstantial, and the legal standards for prosecution required more definitive proof. Johnson's known history, though disturbing, was not enough to secure a conviction without a direct connection to the murder itself. Police continued to pursue every lead, re-interviewing witnesses and reviewing case files from other unsolved crimes in the region to identify patterns or overlaps. The limitations of forensic science in the early 1990s also hindered progress. While evidence such as the mirror and traces collected from the scene were preserved, DNA testing was still in its infancy. Investigators documented and safeguarded every piece of material they could, anticipating future advances that might provide a breakthrough. Over the following years, the case remained active, with detectives revisiting files, analyzing reports, and maintaining pressure on persons of interest, including Johnson. Throughout this time, Andrea's family remained heavily involved, advocating for continued attention to the case. They attended public meetings, engaged with media, and lobbied for the investigation to utilize emerging forensic techniques. Their persistence helped keep Andrea's story in the public eye, emphasizing that unresolved cases affect entire communities, and that time alone does not erase the need for justice. By the early 2000s, cold case detectives formally re-examined the evidence, hoping that advances in DNA testing could finally link Johnson to the crime. The combination of his past, the essay, and possession of Andrea's belongings made him a strong candidate for further scrutiny. However, the investigation was about to face a devastating setback that would further complicate an already difficult search for justice. The tangled web of circumstantial evidence, evolving forensic technology, and bureaucratic hurdles highlighted the challenges faced by law enforcement in solving crimes that had been left unresolved for years. Despite being a prime suspect, Johnson would not face trial for Andrea King's murder, leaving the case suspended in a state of limbo and Andrea's family still searching for answers. This moment marked both the high point of investigative progress and a new low in the ongoing struggle to secure justice. By the mid-2000s, investigators were hopeful that modern forensic science could finally provide the breakthrough needed in Andrea King's case. DNA technology had advanced significantly, and cold case detectives requested that preserved evidence from the scene, including the compact mirror and other personal items, be tested using the latest methods. The hope was that a clear genetic profile could either confirm suspicions about Andrew Paul Johnson or identify another individual connected to the crime. However, a shocking discovery derailed these efforts. When police went to retrieve the evidence from storage, several critical items were missing. The disappearance of these materials meant that the possibility of a definitive forensic link had vanished. Without this proof, prosecutors could not move forward, and Johnson, while still a person of interest due to his prior offenses and the circumstantial evidence, could not be formally charged with Andrea's murder. The loss of evidence was a devastating blow to both the investigation and Andrea's family, extinguishing a rare opportunity for closure. Despite these setbacks, law enforcement has never officially closed the case. Halifax Regional Police continue to classify Andrea King's murder as active and ongoing, encouraging anyone with information, even seemingly minor details, to come forward. Over the years, tips have occasionally surfaced, but none have led to an arrest or trial. Authorities have stressed the importance of community involvement, noting that even a small piece of information can be critical in solving long unsolved crimes. The King family has remained a steadfast presence in keeping Andrea's memory alive and advocating for justice. Anne King, Andrea's mother, has spoken publicly about the case, urging witnesses or anyone with knowledge to contact police. Her persistence has ensured that Andrea's story continues to be recognized, preventing it from fading into obscurity despite more than 3 decades passing since her disappearance. Today, Andrea King's murder stands as one of Nova Scotia's most chilling cold cases. The combination of lost evidence, circumstantial connections to a prime suspect, and the passage of time has made resolution difficult, but the case has never been abandoned. Investigators and the family alike hold on to the hope that advances in forensic science, renewed tips, or someone coming forward could finally bring answers. Andrea's story is a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the lasting impact of unresolved crime. It highlights the need for meticulous evidence preservation and continuous investigation in cold cases, and it emphasizes the human toll when justice is delayed. For her family, the absence of resolution has meant living with grief, uncertainty, and unanswered questions for decades. The Halifax Regional Police and the Nova Scotia Department of Justice have offered a reward of up to 150,000 Canadian dollars for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person or persons responsible. This incentive, along with ongoing public appeals, aims to generate new leads that could finally unlock the mystery surrounding Andrea King's death. Andrea King's journey ended tragically, but her story is far from forgotten. The hope remains that someday, through science, witness testimony, or a long overdue confession, the case will be solved. Until then, her family, community, and investigators continue to keep her memory alive, determined to ensure that the young woman who set out for adventure is remembered, and that justice, though delayed, is never denied. Amber Alyssa Tuccaro was born in January of the year 1990. She grew up in Alberta and was a proud member of the Mikisew Cree First Nation. Her family and friends remember her as a lively and outgoing young woman who loved to laugh and spend time with the people closest to her. She was known for her quick wit and a strong, independent spirit that made her stand out wherever she went. By the summer of 2010, Amber was 20 years old and fully devoted to her 14-month-old son, Jacob. She had embraced motherhood with determination, often telling family that her little boy gave her purpose and focus. Those who knew her said she doted on him, carrying him everywhere and making him the center of her world. Despite being young, she was committed to building a good life for her son. Amber's close relationship with her family was another defining part of her life. She leaned on them for support, and in return, they admired her resilience. Her mother, Vivian, often spoke of how Amber had a contagious energy that lifted the people around her. She was not perfect, but she was deeply loved and trusted by those who knew her best. That summer, Amber decided to take a short trip to Edmonton with her son and a close friend. It was meant to be an ordinary getaway, a chance to spend some time outside of Fort McMurray, where she had been living. For Amber, it was just another step in balancing young motherhood with a desire to enjoy her early 20s. What seemed like a simple trip, however, would become the starting point of one of Alberta's most haunting unsolved cases. On Tuesday, August 17th of 2010, Amber Tuccaro left Fort McMurray with her young son Jacob and a close friend. They boarded a short flight bound for Edmonton, planning what was supposed to be a brief stay in the area. To stretch their money, the group decided not to stay directly in the city. Instead, they booked a motel in Nisku, a small community south of Edmonton, only a few minutes from the airport. The plan was simple. They would spend the night in the motel and then head into Edmonton the next day to continue their trip. But on the evening of Wednesday, August 18th, Amber grew restless. She wanted to go into the city sooner rather than later. With her son left safely in the care of her friend, Amber stepped outside the motel with the idea of finding a ride to Edmonton. Witness accounts later confirmed that she was seen getting into a vehicle with an unknown man that night. It was the last time anyone saw her alive. By the next morning, when Amber did not return to the motel, her friend grew worried and phoned her mother, Vivian, to share her concerns. That call marked the beginning of the family's long search for answers. As investigators began piecing together Amber Tuccaro's final known movements, one crucial piece of evidence emerged: a phone call she made while inside the vehicle of the unknown man. At the time, Amber was speaking with her brother, who was incarcerated, meaning their call was automatically recorded. This decision to call her brother would later provide the most important lead in her case. The recording captured nearly 17 minutes of conversation between Amber and the unidentified man, but only about 1 minute has ever been publicly released. In that audio, Amber can be heard questioning the man about where he is taking her. He repeatedly insists that they are heading north toward Edmonton, but Amber's growing confusion and fear are clear. She challenges his directions, at one point exclaiming that he had better not be taking her somewhere she does not want to go. Police believe the man was lying to her, and that, instead of driving toward the city, he was heading south into rural parts of Leduc County. Amber's rising alarm is unmistakable in the recording, with her final audible question, "Where are we?" leaving a haunting echo of her last moments. For years, investigators have considered this audio to be the strongest clue in identifying Amber's killer. The voice of the man is distinct, and authorities have appealed to the public repeatedly, hoping that someone close to him would recognize it. Despite widespread media coverage and countless plays of the audio, the speaker has never been definitively identified, leaving a chilling mystery at the heart of the case. When Amber Tuccaro's family reported her missing on August 19th of 2010, they immediately sensed that her case was not taken seriously. Officers with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Leduc suggested she had probably gone out on her own and would soon return. This dismissive attitude delayed any meaningful search efforts during the most crucial early hours. Within just 10 days of her disappearance, an officer recommended that Amber be removed from the National Missing Persons database. That decision was based on unconfirmed information and created a devastating setback. For nearly a month, Amber was not even officially listed as a missing person. In those lost weeks, investigators failed to conduct interviews with potential witnesses or secure key evidence. Even Amber's personal belongings, left behind in the Nisku motel room, were mishandled. Instead of being preserved as evidence, they sat untouched for months before ultimately being destroyed. This meant that potential LUTs, such as fingerprints or DNA, were lost forever. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police did not begin interviewing those who might have had information until 4 months after Amber vanished. To the Tuccaro family, this delay showed a shocking lack of urgency. By the time the interviews began, memories had faded and possible witnesses were harder to locate. In the years that followed, complaints about the handling of Amber's case grew louder. Her family formally filed a grievance in 2014, leading to an independent review. That review, completed in 2018, described the investigation as deficient and inadequate. In 2019, a deputy commissioner of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police publicly apologized, admitting the investigation was not our best work. For Amber's family, the apology did little to ease their pain. To them, the failures represented more than mistakes. They symbolized a lack of respect and urgency for the life of an Indigenous woman. After 2 long years of waiting and searching, Amber Tuccaro's family finally received some answers. In August of 2012, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police released a brief, 1-minute clip of the phone call Amber had made while in the vehicle with the unknown man. The recording became a critical piece of evidence, providing the only audio of Amber in her final moments. Just a few days later, on September 1st of 2012, a group of horseback riders discovered a human skull in a rural field in Leduc County. Dental records later confirmed it was Amber Tuccaro. The location of her remains was not far from the back roads, where her phone call suggested she had been taken, bringing a heartbreaking clarity to the timeline of her disappearance. The discovery of her remains marked the beginning of a renewed investigation. Police continue to treat the case as an active homicide, seeking anyone who may have information about the man who drove her away. The recording of her voice remains the most important clue, yet the man's identity has never been confirmed. investigators hope that someone, whether a family member, friend, or witness, may recognize the voice and come forward. Amber's case has become a significant example of the national crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada. Her story highlights systemic failures in law enforcement and the urgent need for accountability. The Tuccaro family has remained a powerful voice, advocating for justice and reforms to protect Indigenous women. Her brother, Chief Billy Joe Tuccaro, has stated publicly that the family wants all missing Indigenous women to be treated with the same urgency as any other citizen. The search for Amber's killer continues, but her story has already sparked awareness across Canada. Tips continue to come in from the public, and the case remains open, with investigators actively following leads. Amber Tuccaro's legacy is one of resilience and determination. She was a beloved mother, daughter, and sister whose life and tragic death have brought attention to a wider social issue. Her family's tireless advocacy ensures that her name and the call for justice will never be forgotten. The hope remains that one day, someone with the truth about what happened to Amber will step forward and finally bring closure to her family. On the evening of June 7th, 2017, 24-year-old Cortney Lake was captured on a residential security camera, leaving her home on Wellington Crescent in Mount Pearl. She walked away around 7:52 p.m., wearing a gray hooded parka with a pink liner, a pink and white plaid shirt, black pants, and glasses. Details later confirmed by the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary. Just 2 minutes later, at 7:54 p.m., dashcam footage shows her getting into a black GMC pickup truck on Michener Avenue. The truck had a distinctive Browning-style camouflage deer head decal on the rear window, a key detail in the investigation. Prior to that night, Cortney's life was difficult. She was navigating a troubled relationship and had reported serious abuse. Her ex-boyfriend, Philip Smith, had court-ordered conditions to stay away from her and her family. Just hours before her disappearance, he admitted in court that he had picked her up, violating one of those restraining orders. That admission transformed the case. What had begun as a missing person report quickly grew into something much darker. The next day, June 8th, the RNC officially identified Cortney's disappearance as suspicious. Public appeals went out for help. Dashcam footage, surveillance images, and the distinctive truck detail were all shared, in hopes someone would come forward. Family, friends, and community members rallied behind the hashtag #HelpFindCourtney, pushing the story across social media, desperately seeking new leads. The last known images of Cortney walking toward the truck remain frozen in time, haunting, unresolved, and central to a case that still haunts Newfoundland. In the days following Cortney Lake's disappearance, the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary began building a detailed picture of her final known movements. Officers conducted door-to-door inquiries throughout Mount Pearl, gathering additional residential footage to track the black pickup truck after it left Michener Avenue. Investigators confirmed that the truck continued toward the area of Ruth Avenue, a detail they later publicly released in hopes of jogging someone's memory. Community members submitted tips, video clips, and possible sightings, giving the RNC crucial starting points as the search widened. Cortney's family organized public search efforts almost immediately. Volunteers combed wooded areas, trails, and ponds across Mount Pearl and St. John's, guided by the possibility that the truck may have traveled to isolated spaces nearby. These searches drew large crowds, all hoping to find any sign of where Cortney could have gone after entering the vehicle. The RNC supported several of these community-led searches by providing guidance and ensuring search locations did not interfere with active investigative work. Police also began examining Cortney's recent history, including her known fears, her relationships, and any potential conflicts that could help establish motive. They contacted individuals she had interacted with in the days leading up to her disappearance, including friends, co-workers, and family members. Officers reviewed her phone records, checked banking activity, and monitored travel documents. Everything indicated that Cortney had not left the area voluntarily, and there was no evidence she had planned to go anywhere that night beside her mother's home. Investigators began looking closely at the truck captured on camera, analyzing its unique features and matching them to possible owners. Tips from the public helped narrow the list, and before long, the RNC identified one individual whose vehicle matched the distinctive appearance shown in the footage. This discovery prompted further interviews, forensic examinations, and searches of locations connected to that person. Police remained cautious, stating only that they had identified individuals of investigative interest, but they emphasized that the case remained open-ended as new information continued to surface. As the end of June approached, the investigation took a significant turn. Evidence gathered in the first few weeks led detectives to conclude that Cortney had not simply gone missing. She had likely been the victim of a violent crime. This shift in focus marked the beginning of an entirely new phase of the investigation, one that would bring the province's attention to a single troubling question. If Cortney had been harmed, where was she now? This change in direction set the stage for the next major development in the case, as police prepared to address the public with their most serious update yet. By late June of 2017, the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary had reached a point where the evidence gathered no longer aligned with a typical missing person case. Detectives had reviewed hours of residential footage, confirmed the exact time Cortney was last seen, and traced her path with as much precision as the available video allowed. Despite the extensive efforts of both law enforcement and volunteers, there remained no confirmed sightings of Cortney after she entered the black pickup truck on Michener Avenue. With each passing day, the likelihood that she was simply lost or hiding diminished. On the afternoon of June 30th, the RNC held a carefully prepared press conference. The tone was somber, and the message was unmistakably serious. Investigators announced that Cortney Lake's disappearance was now officially being treated as a homicide. They stated that information collected during the investigation supported the belief that she had been the victim of a violent act. This declaration did not come lightly. Police rarely reclassify a case without strong evidentiary grounds. Although they did not share details of what led them to this conclusion, the shift marked a major turning point for both the investigation and the community. At that same conference, the RNC released two key pieces of information. First, they made public the security footage showing Cortney getting into the black pickup truck on the evening of June 7th. It was a clip the police had held privately until they were certain it was essential for public awareness. The vehicle's distinctive Browning camouflage decal, its model, and the exact timestamp were all highlighted as investigators urged anyone who recognized the truck's movements after that point to come forward. Second, police confirmed that more than one person had been identified as a person of interest. They refused to release names, citing the need to protect the integrity of the investigation, but the phrasing caught widespread attention. The possibility of additional individuals connected to the events of that night led to speculation and urgency within the community, especially as investigators had already searched multiple properties linked to one of those individuals. Following the press conference, search operations intensified. The RNC deployed specialized units to remote locations on the outskirts of St. John's and Mount Pearl, focusing on areas with a difficult terrain. Officers used helicopters, all-terrain vehicles, and trained dogs to scan ponds, wooded regions, and isolated trails. These searches were guided by tips, by digital data patterns, and by their own investigative analysis. Despite the scale of these efforts, no physical trace of Cortney surfaced. As the investigation moved deeper into the summer, detectives continued to pursue new leads while carefully re-examining earlier ones. They worked to verify timelines, confirm sightings, and and clarify information provided by witnesses. Every movement captured on video, every reported tip, and every piece of digital evidence was reviewed in hopes of revealing where Cortney had been taken after the pickup truck turned off Michener Avenue. While the declaration of homicide brought a new level of seriousness to the search, it also left the public and Cortney's family facing an overwhelming mixture of grief, fear, and determination. With no recovery, no confession, and no firm answers, the case had shifted into one of Newfoundland's most deeply troubling investigations, one that now centered on uncovering who was responsible and where Cortney might be. As July of 2017 unfolded, the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary intensified its focus on the one individual whose actions, history, and proximity to Cortney placed him at the center of the investigation, Philip Smith. Although the police had not publicly named him during early press conferences, their investigative direction became increasingly clear through the searches they conducted and the court records that emerged. Smith's past involvement with Cortney, combined with the video evidence of him picking her up on the evening she vanished, brought him under mounting scrutiny. In the weeks following Cortney's disappearance, the RNC executed detailed searches at locations connected to Smith. Officers inspected his property, examined outbuildings, and used specialized teams to look for any signs that Cortney had been there. They also seized his black GMC Sierra pickup truck and conducted forensic testing. The distinctive vehicle, recognizable for its browning camouflage decal, was the last confirmed place where Cortney had been seen alive. Although the truck was eventually returned after examination, investigators remained convinced that the time she spent inside it held critical answers. During this period, Smith faced growing legal consequences unrelated to the homicide investigation, but deeply tied to his past behavior toward Cortney. On June 27th, only 20 days after she vanished, he was arrested for breaching a no-contact order. This was not directly related to the search for Cortney, but it placed him in custody while investigators continued to build their case. His prior guilty plea for assaulting Cortney in April of that same year, along with earlier breaches of court-ordered restrictions, painted a clear pattern of escalating and dangerous behavior. As detectives continued their work, Smith appeared in court again on August 9th of 2017. During that hearing, he pleaded guilty to breaching the order that prohibited contact with Cortney. But what drew the most attention was a brief and chilling admission. Smith acknowledged that he had picked Cortney up on the evening she disappeared. He confirmed what police had already believed from the security footage. However, he refused to answer any other questions. He provided no explanation for where they went, what happened afterward, or when he last saw her. His silence deepened the mystery and intensified the sense of urgency around the investigation. Behind the scenes, the RNC was conducting broad and methodical searches in remote and heavily wooded areas. Tips from the public, digital analysis, and additional evidence guided officers to locations across the Avalon Peninsula, including isolated trails and rugged terrain. One area, near Bellevue Beach, roughly an hour outside St. John S., drew particular attention. Detectives were not ready to release their full reasoning, but it was clear they believed the region might hold relevance to Smith's movements in the time after Cortney was last seen. Despite their efforts, investigators found no trace of Cortney. Each unsuccessful search added emotional weight to the case, leaving her loved ones in a devastating limbo. Still, police publicly reaffirmed their belief that people within the community held information that had not yet been shared. They encouraged anyone with knowledge of Smith's movements, especially on the night of June 7th, or the days that followed, to contact investigators. Smith's behavior, combined with his refusal to cooperate, solidified him as the primary focus of the investigation. And as the summer progressed into autumn, an unexpected and tragic shift in the case would change its direction forever. As autumn of 2017 began, the investigation into Cortney Lake's disappearance reached a critical turning point. one that brought no closure, only deeper uncertainty. Philip Smith, the man investigators believed held the most crucial information, had remained silent through every stage of questioning. But on the final day of October, a development occurred that would permanently alter the course of the case. On the evening of October 31st, Smith contacted a family member and stated that he intended to end his life. This call triggered immediate concern and prompted authorities to begin a search for him. Early the next morning, on November 1st of 2017, officers and police dogs were deployed to the Bellevue Beach area, a region tied to Smith's family through a cabin located nearby. After several hours of searching the wooded landscape, an RNC police dog located Smith's body in a forested section of the property. His death was confirmed at the scene. With that discovery, the only person known to have last seen Cortney alive was gone, taking with him the answers that investigators, and especially Cortney's family, had desperately hoped he would eventually provide. The search for Cortney intensified in the days that followed. Officers conducted a detailed examination of the surrounding woods, checking trails, ditches, and dense brush for any possible evidence connected to her disappearance. Despite covering a wide area, investigators found nothing that linked the location to Cortney's case. The discovery of Smith's body offered no new leads, leaving detectives with a suspect who could no longer be questioned, in a case that remained painfully open. 2 weeks later, on November 14th of 2017, the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary addressed the public in a formal update. In that announcement, they confirmed what many had suspected. Philip Smith was the sole suspect in the homicide of Cortney Lake. Although police had previously referred to persons of interest, their investigation had ultimately narrowed to one individual. With Smith deceased, the case shifted from seeking a suspect to seeking answers that only he had been in a position to provide. The months that followed brought extensive searches across the Avalon Peninsula. Volunteers, family members, and trained search teams combed rivers, forests, and trails, refusing to give up hope. Cortney's family remained publicly committed to finding her, organizing searches, and speaking about her case whenever possible. Their determination helped keep public attention alive, especially during times when investigative updates grew sparse. What remained clear was that no amount of time or distance could weaken their resolve to bring her home. To this day, Cortney Lake has not been found. Her disappearance remains an active homicide investigation, and the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary continues to urge anyone with information, no matter how minor it may seem, to come forward. Detectives believe that someone within the community may have witnessed something relevant on the night of June 7th or in the days that followed, and that those details could finally help locate her remains. Cortney's case stands as one of Newfoundland's most heartbreaking reminders of how quickly violence can escalate and how devastating unanswered questions can be for a family. Her loved ones have preserved her memory through vigils, community walks, and continued advocacy, always pushing for the truth that was denied to them by the silence of the man at the center of the investigation. They remain hopeful that, with time, someone will step forward and provide the information needed to bring Cortney home. Although years have passed, this case continues to hold a powerful impact across the province. What happened after Cortney stepped into that truck remains unknown, but her family's belief in finding her has never faded, and until answers emerge, her story continues to be told, because every lead, every shared detail, and every moment of awareness brings them one step closer to the closure they have been seeking for far too long. To understand why Daniel Baker's disappearance shook Halifax so deeply, you first need to understand who he was. Daniel was 40 years old in 1997, born and raised in Nova Scotia. He wasn't a stranger to the city streets where he vanished. Halifax was home, a place he knew intimately. People who knew him described him as thoughtful and dependable, a man quietly rebuilding his life after periods of personal struggle. Daniel stood 6'1" and had a slender frame, weighing around 155 pounds. He had short, dark blonde hair, fair skin, and bright blue eyes that friends often recalled as calm and attentive. His appearance was unassuming, but he carried himself with a sense of quiet purpose. Daniel's life at the time of his disappearance had an air of stability. He had recently moved back to Halifax from Bridgewater in July of 1997, choosing to reconnect with his old neighborhood and resume work and daily routines he had long left behind. Those close to him said Daniel enjoyed the simple routines of city life. He knew his streets, the restaurants, and the small shops in his area. His move back to Halifax was not impulsive. It was a deliberate decision to rebuild a sense of normalcy. Friends and family described him as someone who valued routine, who rarely acted without thought, and who had no known conflicts that might endanger him. Even in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, Daniel's life appeared ordinary. He went to work, ran errands, and spent time with family. There were no warnings, no messages hinting at fear or danger, and no plans to leave suddenly. That ordinary, predictable existence is part of what makes the events of December 12th so chilling. Here was a man living a normal life, familiar with his surroundings, who vanished in a way that defies logic. By looking closely at who Daniel Baker was, his habits, his personality, and his life in Halifax, we begin to see why his disappearance is so haunting. It wasn't a case of someone lost in a strange city or caught in a dangerous situation by accident. This was a man who walked out of his home for a simple, short journey and then simply disappeared. The story of Daniel Baker begins not with chaos or danger, but with the quiet, ordinary life of a man who should have been safe in his own city. The evening of Daniel Baker's disappearance began like any other Friday night in Halifax. It was December 12th, 1997, and the city was settled into the early winter chill. Daniel was at a house on Preston Street, a residential area not far from the bustling commercial stretch of Quinpool Road. Around 11 p.m., he decided to step out for a short walk to a nearby restaurant, a journey that, under normal circumstances, would have taken just a few minutes. Daniel dressed for the winter weather, wearing a black suede jacket, blue jeans, and black leather gloves. Underneath, he wore a dark blue, red, and white dress shirt, and on his feet were white Reebok sneakers. Every detail of his clothing would later become a critical part of police descriptions, as these were the last known visual records of him. The walk Daniel planned was short, along well-lit streets that would have seen some late-night foot and vehicle traffic. Preston Street leads directly to Quinpool Road, a main thoroughfare lined with shops and restaurants. Despite the late hour, the route was familiar and safe, a path he had walked many times before. Yet, within moments of leaving the house, Daniel simply vanished. Witnesses did not see anything unusual, and no disturbances were reported in the immediate area. There were no sounds of a struggle and no objects left behind that might suggest an accident or confrontation. By the time anyone realized he had not arrived at the restaurant, Daniel had already disappeared from the streets of Halifax. His last known direction was north along Preston Street toward Quinpool Road, but he never reached his destination. The suddenness of his disappearance left an immediate sense of urgency. Daniel had walked only a short distance, yet in the span of those few minutes, he seemed to disappear into thin air. The ordinary walk that evening transformed into a baffling mystery, one that left family, friends, and neighbors stunned and searching for answers. For a man so familiar with his surroundings, who was taking no unusual risks, his disappearance was as inexplicable as it was terrifying. The night Daniel vanished would mark the beginning of one of Nova Scotia's most puzzling unsolved cases, a case defined not by evidence, but by absence. The streets he walked remained ordinary, familiar, and visible, yet he was gone without a trace, leaving behind a question that would haunt the city for decades to come. Once it became clear that Daniel Baker had not returned from his short walk, concern quickly turned into alarm. His family reported him missing to the Halifax Regional Police, triggering an investigation that would stretch over decades. From the very beginning, officers were faced with an unusual challenge. There was no obvious crime scene, no signs of a struggle, and no immediate clues to follow. In the first days after his disappearance, police canvassed the neighborhood thoroughly. They knocked on doors along Preston Street and Quinpool Road, speaking with residents and local business owners. Investigators worked to recreate Daniel's final known movements, seeking anyone who might have seen him during that brief walk. Despite these efforts, every lead turned cold. Neighbors reported nothing out of the ordinary, and there were no eyewitness accounts to indicate what might have happened. Authorities also examined Daniel's personal life for possible explanations. They interviewed friends, co-workers, and family members to understand his routines, relationships, and state of mind. Daniel had no known conflicts, no unexplained deaths, and no history suggesting he would voluntarily disappear. Every question answered seemed to deepen the mystery, rather than provide clarity. Police also monitored his financial activity. Unlike some missing persons cases where accounts are accessed after someone leaves, Daniel's bank accounts showed no activity. His absence from financial and personal records suggested that he did not plan to vanish. Every ordinary channel that might have offered a clue, credit card usage, phone calls, or vehicle tracking, produced nothing. Over the years, the Halifax Regional Police kept the case active. While many investigations can grow cold after months or years, Daniel's file remained open. Authorities periodically release public appeals for information, especially on anniversaries of his disappearance, hoping the time might jog a memory or encourage someone with knowledge to come forward. The investigation has been meticulous and ongoing, yet Daniel Baker has never been found, leaving his case as one of the province's most enduring mysteries. Despite decades of effort, the investigation into Daniel Baker's disappearance remains defined by absence. There is no evidence of a crime scene, no confirmed sightings since that night, and no physical trace of him anywhere along his known route. The investigation continues, relying on the hope that even the smallest detail could provide the breakthrough needed to finally answer the question, what happened to Daniel Baker? With no physical evidence or confirmed sightings, Daniel Baker's disappearance has fueled numerous theories, though none can be proven. One of the most widely considered possibilities is foul play. Authorities, including the Nova Scotia Department of Justice, treat the case as suspicious. Daniel's disappearance is included in the province's Rewards for Major Unsolved Crimes program, which offers up to $150,000 for information that leads to an arrest and conviction. This program is reserved for cases where foul play is strongly suspected, highlighting the seriousness with which investigators view the situation. Some theorize that Daniel could have encountered a stranger or been the target of a carefully planned act. The complete lack of evidence, however, makes it nearly impossible to determine what, if anything, happened that night. If someone did intend to harm him, they managed to leave no trace, no belongings, no witnesses, and no forensic evidence. It is a level of precision that has made the case particularly confounding to investigators. Another possibility considered by some is that Daniel experienced a sudden accident. Given the short distance of his walk and the urban setting, it would have to have been extraordinary for an accident to leave no trace at all. Some have suggested he could have fallen or become trapped in an area that is rarely visited, though nothing was ever found to support this. Even searches along nearby waterways and public spaces turned up no clues. A third, though less likely, theory is that Daniel chose to disappear voluntarily. Friends and family consistently report that he had no indication of wanting to leave, no plans to abandon his life, and no behavior suggesting he intended to vanish. Staying hidden for decades without using bank accounts, contacting anyone, or leaving a digital trace would have required an almost impossible level of planning. For investigators and loved ones alike, the scenario remains difficult to reconcile with the man they knew. Ultimately, every theory raises more questions than answers, If foul play occurred, who was involved and why? If an accident happened, how did it leave no evidence? And if he disappeared by choice, how could someone erase themselves so completely from public and private records? Each unanswered question contributes to the enduring mystery of Daniel Baker, a case that has puzzled Halifax for nearly 3 decades and continues to challenge investigators today. Nearly 3 decades have passed since Daniel Baker vanished on that December night in 1997, yet his disappearance continues to resonate deeply with his family and the Halifax community. For his loved ones, the absence of answers has been a source of lasting grief. Each year brings the same questions, the same uncertainty, and the same hope that someone, somewhere, may finally provide a clue. The city itself has not forgotten him. Daniel's case is frequently cited in discussions of unsolved disappearances in Nova Scotia, and his story has become part of the local consciousness, a reminder of how suddenly a life can be interrupted and how mysterious the world can sometimes be. Law enforcement continues to maintain the investigation as active, releasing appeals for information and updating public notices to keep awareness alive. The $150,000 reward offered through the Rewards for Major Unsolved Crimes program remains available, emphasizing that authorities are still seeking leads. Investigators stress that even the smallest piece of information, something that may have seemed insignificant at the time, could be crucial in finally solving the case. The continued efforts demonstrate a commitment to finding justice and closure for Daniel and his family. While decades of investigation have produced no definitive answers, the hope persists that the truth will one day emerge, whether through new evidence, a witness coming forward, or a chance discovery. The story of Daniel Baker is far from closed. His disappearance is a reminder that some mysteries endure, haunting communities and families for generations. Daniel Baker remains missing, and his story is a quiet but powerful testament to the unresolved nature of many disappearances. The search for answers continues, fueled by the determination of law enforcement, the vigilance of the public, and the enduring love of those who have never stopped hoping. Until the day the mystery is solved, Daniel's absence serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring need for answers in the face of the unknown.